or a line that could be lifted right out of Emerson's Self-Reliance, no question. In other words, you're only going to go as high as the dreams to which you aspire. Well, let's consider that as one of our major messages here. What are the dreams? On what level do you build your house? That's how high you go. So you might want to think about building those, as Thoreau says it, of course, in Walden, castles in the air, but put the foundations under them. And he says it that way. Of course, great lover of that line from Thoreau's Walden, published, of course, 1 year before the 1855 publishing of Leaves of Grass. He says, I exist, sounding very much like Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. I exist as I am. And I think that notebook rendering that I gave to you earlier does matter, that he uses that phrase of I am, and why that's such an important phrase, right? Exodus 3:14, I am that I am, is obviously in his mind. I exist as I am. That is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. Now this contentment and this acceptance, you'll maybe remember from passage 3, he says, I am satisfied, which is, of course, ironically, actually not the word he used in 55. It was actually the word content. I see, dance, and sing. Do you remember this line from passage 3? We're playing a very similar game. I sit content, and if each and all be aware, I sit content. Now, this is Whitman telling Whitman, if you're not accepted, it's okay. You're still going to be content. If you are accepted, it's okay. You're still going to be content, right? This is that quest that, of course, Keats is playing with in his When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, that on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. It's that same attempt to try to come to terms and be content with the fact that one cannot always have control over the events of the world, right? He says it this way, one world is aware, and by far the largest to me. Notice in this regards, he will say this whole idea of being aware has to do with proper perspective. By the way, we're going to do a poem later called Faces, where he says, I see them and complain not, and content with all. He'll echo this idea several times through Leaves of Grass, which is why I'm pointing it out to you here. One world is aware, and by far the largest to me, and that is, and then he'll use, of course, the very word from the title of this poem, Song of Myself. Notice he calls himself a world. It's fascinating, right? It's like a planet. He's playing with this planetary idea. And whether I come, obviously the first line, the very first word of Leaves of Grass, right? Used over 500 times at least in Leaves of Grass. You can go back and count. It's an amazing thing. Every time you see the word come in Leaves of Grass, just identify it in the way that it works. And whether I come to my own today, or in 10,000, or 10 million years, I can cheerfully, right? This is that sunny point of view. I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness, I can wait. Of course, he was familiar with Longfellow's classic Psalm of Life, let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing. What is it? Learn to labor into, and it's this word wait, right? In other words, patience. It's almost as if Whitman is convincing himself, I gotta wait to see how everything is going to go. Whitman, many scholars have argued, genuinely believed that a book of poems would somehow keep America from going to war against itself. And when it finally did happen, that America went to war against himself, and of course his own brother is the way in which he found himself into hospitals, where he then spent so many hours with young wounded soldiers of both the North and the South. We'll have more to say about that when we get to drum taps. It kind of shattered his heart. It broke him in profound ways, because he genuinely believed or hoped that if only Americans would read his poetry, they would all come together and they could reconcile their differences. It was an idealism that couldn't have been in any way legitimate, and yet for Whitman it was totally legitimate. He's saying it right here. See, I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness, I can wait. Now the finish, he's going to sound very much like Archimedes. Remember that one? Give me a place to stand, I'll move the earth. My foothold is tinioned and mortised in granite. Now, he loves, earlier it was Micah, he loves to talk his stones, go all the way through Leaves of Grass and pay attention to all the different kind of rock or soil or dirt that gets mentioned here. It's granite. In other words, I'm stable, right? My foothold is tinioned and I'm stable. I'm ready to go. And then he uses, interestingly, I laugh at what you call dissolution. Now, pay attention to the way in which laugh gets used. Remember, I just quoted those lines from passage 3. I'm satisfied, I see, dance, laugh, sing. Here we are back to it. But notice here it's, I laugh at what you call dissolution. In other words, like speaking like Hamlet, I can't even imagine that death is actually that final anyway. The readiness is all, is the way that Hamlet will say it. And he finishes epistemologically with, and I know the amplitude of time. Now, I believe that T.S. Eliot was very influenced by this set of lines in his writing of Burnt Norton. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. All time is eternally present. All time is unredeemable. Right? Remember these lines. And I think that there's a certain echo in Eliot's, especially for quartets, that will play right off of this set of lines. He says, here's what I do know. There is this amazing amplitude of time. And everything is about the circles that, of course, Emerson will write about in his famous essay circles. And to that degree, I'm okay. And I know exactly where I'm standing, and I'm fine. Everything's going to be okay for me. And this is who I am. I'm this curious nude. He calls it nude, right? In other words, defenseless poet who is in search of awakening. And I'm going to get there. I'm going to find it out. I'm going to do it. Well, at 2a, obviously, this idea of living without regrets, of standing for the sunny point of view, all of that obviously is central to this poem. At 2b, the repetitions and the echoes, they're all over the place in poems like this. And I think it's almost as if Whitman wrote the first 19 sections to start playing around with so many of these echoes, and you're going to see it. And I'm avoiding doing too much of that, or I'm trying to, where I'm like, hey guys, do you remember when we saw this, and do you remember when we heard this from before? But I want you to play that game as you go through these poems. I hope that you do. At 3a, of course, we've mentioned Emerson's Self-Reliance and Thoreau's Walden. I think those are important. Song of Myself, passage 46. I know I have the best of time and space, and was never measured, and never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey, come listen all. At the end of Song of Myself, we're already there. I mean, we're at passage 20 here, and that's 46, so you can do the quick math as to how far away we are. And yet, we're going to hear that notion that it is the best of time and space. This is that sunny point of view that he says he always wanted to live with. Which leads us to 3b, and a question now for you. How about you? Do you stand for the sunny point of view, or are you naturally inclined to see how everything is so terrible and, oh, it's so bad? And why is that the case for you, if you're not that kind of person who has that sunny point of view? And then, of course, this one, which is kind of a part of that as well. Do you think it's actually possible to live without lots and lots of regrets? Okay, so we've done things in our past that we're not so proud of, pleased with, or whatever. How do you live beyond those? I think for Whitman, he believes that it's in that whole thing of hankering, being curious, always looking for the next, and, of course, the amplitude of time. I hope that this kind of study for you is challenging you to think about the beauty and the amplitude of time. Thank you.